So related to that, I mean, these are challenges that every private company, private equity, private capital board member are going to face at some point in time in their experience. So let's just talk briefly about the compensation structure related to the board members for this type of a board member. So how is it different than board comp? Um, Given all these different things that they are now, going to be exposed to and expected of.
Yeah, so public company boards, you typically have a mix of a cash stipend and equity, right? Typically restricted stock units that vest after a year or an annual basis. And it's, you know, the cash part typically pays what is expected in regards to the tax component. So you pretty much are kind of even, and it's really more about the long term growth of the company. On the private capital boards, it's typically a very small cash stipend, if any, and it's stock options typically.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to what are the investors willing to share based upon the value that a director is perceived to bring. What is the amount of, and Emily accurately described the mix. What's the amount of mix that's going to be required to get the type of people you want? If you're going through executive search firms and hiring people that come with very high expectations, you better be prepared to sort of meet those. Otherwise, your search is not going to be very successful. But in all cases, it should be a couple of things. It should be defensible, right? To the investors, to the shareholders, to the LPs. You want to, when and where possible, peg it to outside comps,
Mhm.
right? To make sure that you're not just sort of, building your own and going in your own direction. And then the last thing that Emily said that I'll reiterate is it needs to be aligned, right? It needs to be aligned with the outcome of the success of the company, not merely directors, they're collecting large fees. And there's no tie to the outcome. And the directors shouldn't want that because it opens them up to liability.
Yeah, and there are a lot of different organizations, recruiting firms and organizations who do provide those comp stats. So it's pretty easy to get an idea of what is kind of the norm related to the size of the company or even industry. So that's great. A couple questions from the audience that have come up. One is around are term limits or retirement ages common on a private company board?
No.
Is it common on public company boards? I mean, I think the trend is that it would be great governance, but I don't have those on my public company boards. And I think that in terms of private company, it would be probably less common. Robert, have you ever run across one that had
I haven't seen
term
anything.
limits or
Not
retirement
not on a
ages?
private not on a private company, certainly on public companies, and when and where you're using a skills matrix and a succession plan, right? If
Yeah.
they have a skills matrix and a succession plan, you're going to have those other elements. And there's going to be sharing, when you fill out the director questionnaire, you're putting your birthday on a public company, and it's going to be published everywhere until you get off of that board. Right. Hopefully they don't use new pictures as you get older, but certainly not common on a private board.
Yeah, agreed. Same. Not on private. More and more so on public, or they'll have special language that if you reach X age, for example, then the board has the right to request for you to continue on again. Meaning that you've self-identified by age, to Robert's point, because you filled that out. But then they may say, we want you to stay on even though you've reached this particular threshold. I think there was another question. I'm just looking for it in the chat on any recruiters or forums they should engage with to network with private capital firms or to come across particular board seat opportunities like the ones that we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's very important for anybody, particularly the NACD community. It's very important for you to know the recruiters that recruit for your industry and that are recruiting for your profile, not merely for one search, but develop a relationship with them so that you know that you're in their database. They know you by name. I always say if they passed you in the grocery store and they didn't know you, the chances that they're ever going to put you on a board are diminished by that. You want to make sure that they know you. You want to make sure that you're in active dialogue with them, both around the updates to your bio and profile that are very formal, but also just what's going on in your life. The better relationship you can have with them, the more likely you're going to get that phone call. But it is some of the most recognizable names in the tech space. It's going to be Russell Reynolds heavily. In the other operating and industry sectors, you're going to see Korn Ferry, Spencer Stewart, Egon Zehnder. And then there are a host of what I would call regional boutique specialized firms that specialize in certain companies in certain industries. So you have to do your research around that. But again, can't emphasize enough, you don't want to get just the call for the one search. You want to develop the relationship. And even if the call that you get for the one search is not a fit for you, you want to use that as an opportunity to help the search firm and become a friend to the search firm.
Great. Emily, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say that the only other thing I would add would be that once you have gotten in a position with a large private equity fund, typically, if there is another opportunity that makes sense in regards to your skill set and your industry expertise, that they will reach out to you if you have more capacity, especially if they want another independent on one of their portfolio companies. And most of the folks here that are in the audience are already executives and or retired and are looking at board service or already on boards. But one of the things I've been really thinking about over the last 10 years is the typical you know background of a board member in depending on where they are in industry and leading edge technology. Sometimes you're looking at younger individuals that might still be in operating roles or just rising to their operating roles, and they're just cutting edge in regards to technology that may be pivotal or understanding even of the market. So there are more and more opportunities for people that aren't the typical CEO, COO, executive in marketing. There definitely is some more room to get those voices at the table.
Yeah, I'm just to build on that. I think you're absolutely right, especially again, like public company, a lot of CEOs and CFOs are around the table, or former CEOs and CFOs. But in the private space where it's a smaller board and you are more involved, the skills or the network or the contacts around the table are really being looked to on a much more regular basis. So I think one of the things that private equity or private capital is typically looking for is your example, Emily, is expertise in, say, it's, technology, what's current today, but it could be relationships and network in the industry in which they're operating. So you could make introductions. It could be expertise in an area where the CEO and management team don't have as much of, so that they can look to the board for that expertise. It's almost it's not an extension of the management team. That's not right, but it is almost an extension in that they do want to pull up from the board to say, can you help us with this? I think on a much more frequent basis than you would ever see in public.
Yeah, to extend the point, I think you're also going to see in markets that require and that respect long tenure and deep expertise, beyond tech, you're going to see influential people. So lots of former generals and admirals are going to sit on company boards that are doing business with the government or with the military, because not only do they have the understanding, but they also have, in many cases, the relationship. I
Relationships.
think you're also still going to see a number of academics, particularly if those academics have done research in a particular field, neuroscience, health related, and the like. And then, there's a lot of investment going into education, and you're seeing a lot of, former superintendent, again, academic types that are getting opportunities to serve on those boards. But if you're looking at, six, seven, eight, nine people sitting around a table, and you've got half the seats already taken up by contract on who's invested the capital, you want to have, and I would accept your term, Michelle, an extension of the company. You want to have people that are able to extend the capabilities, articulate for the company, and ease the transition into opportunities.
Yeah, very well said. Okay, any best practices you've seen for evaluating director performance in private boards?
Yeah, it comes back to what you've heard Emily and I both speak to, which is the skills matrix, right? They're going to be in any organization, they're going to be 6 to 10 things, call it, that are highly prioritized in terms of leadership, strategic thinking, team building, financial expert. There's a list, and you can find that list or a good list on any of the search engines. But once a company adopts those, and typically that's going to come out of, a human capital committee or a people-centric committee. Once a company adopts those, you typically find that directors are going to be evaluated first and foremost on their availability. What is their meeting attendance schedule like? Secondly, what areas do they typically opine and provide guidance and insight? Third, how well are they engaging in the things that have been prioritized from a people matrix standpoint, from a skills matrix standpoint? And then, if anybody's doing any long range planning, what does succession look like, right? Who's approaching, 70 seems to be a magic number in a lot of places. Who's approaching, the latter years, or who's getting towards the end of the term? And how do we find somebody that can either extend what those high quality, highly experienced directors are able to bring, or take us in a new direction if we're attempting to change the culture and the positioning of the company?
Great. Emily?
Yeah, I think that also depending on how good the GC is at the company, the more formal it could be. But for the most part, it's a pretty informal process. They just check in every once in a while. If you don't have a nominating governance committee, it's an informal process. It's not like a big checklist that you fill out
Not
and
like an
say,
annual,
are
you
we
fill
hitting
out the
all of these?
survey. Yeah.
Yeah, it's typically what Robert said. Are they involved? Are they responsible for the areas that we think that they wouldn't? And sometimes surprisingly, including some areas where they wouldn't have expected. So
Yeah,
Okay.
I do know of one sort of category that in private companies you're going to find a lot of emphasis, and that would be the mega buyout firms, right? Pick your favorite firm that you've heard of that's managing in excess of $20 billion. They have the human capital resources on their staff to really
To
implement
really have a playbook.
strong people policies, and you
Yeah.
use the right term, Michelle, playbook. And they want to be able to differentiate the value their directors bring to their LPs. So you will see board, scorecards. You will see 360 feedback. You'll see a lot of the Vanguard HR and best practices for human capital. But as you go downscale towards truer middle market firms less than $25 billion, you're going to see far less of that because they just don't have time to focus on it. They're much more focused on outcomes than developing, sort of this repeatable process.
Yeah, I mean, I think there may be playbooks, but the playbooks are probably, well, I know the playbooks are focused more on the results of the portco itself and a
Yep.
little bit less on some of the other things. Although, just as a reminder, again, we're talking about there are over 5,000 private equity firms
Yep.
in the US alone. And so, as we know, they all can come in different shapes and sizes and flavors. And so one last question for you guys, and this one is, how consistent is D&O insurance coverage for PE board members?
I think it's ubiquitous. I've not
yeah,
I've not been invited to serve on a board that doesn't have it. Now, have I ever seen the policy? I actually have not seen the policy, but usually on an annual basis, they ask you about certain conflicts and certain activities and behaviors that you're engaged in. They want you to list other boards, and when you get those questions, you typically know that there's D&O in place. Also, in your director agreement between you and the company, there's also a conveyance of, indemnification by D&O policy. So I've not seen a board that has paid directors that doesn't have D&O.
Okay,
Yeah,
great. Emily, same.
agree. Same. I wouldn't join a board that necessarily did have
I
the
would say
DNA
it's
policy.
for sure. You got to ask the question. And if you don't ask the question, at least if you have to have some indicator, but because otherwise, yeah, it's definitely a risk.